really helps families, vulnerable adults with more consistent services and connections.
Questions?
Page 97, Unit 5915, Priority 8, continuation of evidence-based prevention services to keep children safe at home. We were appropriated money in the supplemental session in 23. This is a request to continue that funding through the next biennium. You'll see $500,000 state general fund, $500,000 federal fund. We hope to use this money to encourage implementing evidence-based practices as they sit on the clearinghouse so that we can draw down a 50% match and make these dollars go further. We're in the process of making final decisions on awards for the prevention dollars that we've received. We've pitched it as one-time money. It would be nice to continue those programs once they get up and going. Page 98, priority 9B. This is where you see the rest of the rate increase for group homes, residential treatment centers, and BOCES, the residential BOCE programs. Just a quick explanation too for Senator Guru. You had asked about education for group homes. Education for group homes is usually provided by the local school district, as are the services that they get are outpatient, mental health, et cetera. Priority 9D, it's at the bottom of page 98, is for our family foster care. They too have not experienced a rate increase for ages. We, out of the 8-state region, we pay number 7th on the list. We really do underpay our foster families. And we honestly believe that children do better in homes. And if we want them to be in homes, whether it's somebody that they know or a stranger, certainly those homes need to be able to take care of those kids, and this rate increase reflects that.
So on this particular one, I'm trying to remember the numbers, but it's a fairly sizable jump. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, it was the same percentage increase as the other rates. So we just took the 50%, applied that to the foster care rates. And where that puts us is a little bit more close, a little closer to the top for our region.
Okay, go ahead.
And so if this were adopted in that 8-state region, what would that move them to?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Representative Larson.
You said in an 8-state region, we was 7th.
Yes.
If we adopted this rate increase, what would we then be ranked roughly, or estimate?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, we'd be number 3.
Number 3?
Number 3. We go for 7th place to 3rd place, which is a medal.
And Mr. Chairman.
On the podium.
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman,
Senator.
so Director Schmidt, following up on that, so then what's the dollar amount then in this category? Because you're currently top end is $754 a month, if I'm on the right item here. What would it become if we approve this request?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, I'm going to let Lindsay do fast math. We have, I haven't calculated it at the 75%. We have a range for our child care foster homes based on age. So it actually is 3 different rates within the system. Currently, we pay $664 a month. So if you figure a 50% increase, that would bring us up to about $900 a month. Our top rate is $754 for children 13 to 18 at the current rate. But we can provide that in a little bit more detail. And Mr. Chairman, moving on. I think that was it. Is that it?
No.
No, I lost track, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, on page 99 at the bottom, moving the one-time position from 5801 into 5915. You saw that already in the boys' school budget earlier.
Okay, go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman, those are the ends of our exception requests.
Oh.
That is the end. Yes,
Could-
Madam
could have taken a
Co-Chairman,
30
it
minute
was a
break.
little off my game now, but we got through it quickly.
Okay, any further questions? for the
Chairman?
director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For your staff here in Cheyenne, mainly the main office staff, what is your remote work policy, telework policy?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winters, we have a hybrid policy throughout the whole agency. We have 16 full-time telework agreements in place, meaning those people don't come into the office. We have, and this is across the state, because we do allow telework in our local offices as well. Let me pull that information up for you. Thank you. So we have a total of 14 full-time telework agreements. So those are primary program policy people. For example, our TANF program manager lives in Newcastle. She lives out of town. She's a full-time telework person. We have 128 part-time telework agreements, meaning they have an established schedule of 2 to 3 days, depending on their supervisor, 2 to 3 days in the office and 2 to 3 days at home. And then we have 260 intermittent telework agreements. And what that means is that with the work of the supervisor, they determine what's appropriate, which may change based on work schedules, et cetera. So for example, a lot of our staff in Cheyenne have intermittent telework agreements because they never know from week to week when they'll need to be in the office for certain meetings, et cetera. So the flexibility is there. We delegated that to the divisions to make the decisions about who's appropriate for telework and who is not. Certainly, it makes sense. The boys' school and the girls' school are not going to have many telework agreements, whereas our program policy staff have a little bit more flexibility and can. And then we have 6 temporary, which is for people who may not be working a full telework schedule, but for the time being, need some accommodation.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We'll be
Merry
back.
Christmas.
Yeah, thank you. Merry Christmas. And we'll be back with more information at callbacks.
Okay. All right. We have Business Council handy. I'm sure he's. Okay, Josh, welcome. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, and members of JAC, thank you for having us today. I'm Josh Durrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. With me, I have a number of folks. I have Sarah Fitzgerald, our Chief Strategy Officer. I have Lindsay Orr, who handles our accounting and finances, as well as Hava Case, who handles all of our people and performance for questions there, and a couple other folks if necessary. Before we get going, I do have some slides that I would like to show a couple pieces of data on, if possible, as part of our state of the agency. But I would also like to mention that this is your meeting, and you can tell me exactly where you want me to go on this. So however you'd like me to proceed, I'm happy to do.
Sure, pull them on. Are there handouts for the slides as well?
There are handouts for the slides. They're in your packets. Yeah, we'll be moving to slide 5 on your particular one. Yep,
Okay, go
that's
ahead.
correct. Yeah, so in your paper copies, you'll want to jump to slide 5, I believe it is. But if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'll start with this slide as part of our state of the agency. When it comes down to it, a few years ago, the legislative body, as well as our board of directors and the governor said, you know, we really need to start making some business decisions here. We need to really take a look at the return on investment that the state is getting from the Business Council. And at that time, you know, we made quite a few changes. We've made a number of decisions that have been quite unpopular in some communities, but right for the state. And we've worked hard to really take it from a place where the money was frankly pretty easy to get to, and not a ton of accountability, to a place where it's not always easy to get, and now there's a lot more accountability. And I want to highlight these two columns of data from 2016 to 2019. You'll see that we invested about $73 million in grants and loans into communities. We achieved about 27 million of outside investment. That means money from the communities, money from a business, money from another grant source, perhaps a federal grant. And that generated 463 jobs with an average wage of $23. And as you can see there, the local economic development revenue that was generated. And now I want to stop there for a second, because one of the things that we do is we are a source of revenue for a community. Now, a lot of our communities don't have a number of sources for that, so we become, the BRC grants become a source of revenue as those lease payments for the asset are paid, or as those assets are then transferred in ownership to a business and sold. That money goes to the local community for economic development. And then you can also see that there's a state revenue recapture component of that as well. So a lot of the money that is put into the communities is brought back into the community, or it comes back to the state to be used again. And so you can see the difference between 2016 to 2019 and 2020 to 2023, a pretty significant difference in the things beyond the investment. So we made about the same number of investments, but we pulled in a lot more extra money for those projects. We generated quite a bit more jobs, a much better wage. And I think the key component here too is the local economic development revenue, as well as the state revenue recapture. All of those numbers are trending in the right direction. So when we think about how are we making business decisions and how are we generating a return on investment for the state, these are the markers that we look at. And I think you can see from the direction that we're moving in a way that is honoring that call to us that was made a few years ago. And really, I want to highlight the idea that we're becoming about making a community very resilient and making a community able to define their own economic future. And that's a really big key for us. And so if there are any questions on this particular graph, I would be happy to answer them at this point. Otherwise, we can begin going through the budget.
Representative Wanzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, on all the projects you have, you've got some of the smaller communities that have business-ready planning. And I'm speaking for like under $50,000 for what I consider a relatively small community. Can you give me a feel for what planning looks like for 25,000 or for 50,000?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Swanitzer, yeah, so the way we work, especially in the smaller communities, is, and this is really key for us, is really kind of starting at what problem are we trying to solve? And with the planning process, it's less about the plan that comes out and more about the activities that go into the planning. And so we work with them to identify what are the barriers to growth, what are their opportunities for growth, and then how do we address those? A lot of that is done by our community leadership and engagement personnel and our regional directors. Representative Swanitzer, did that answer your question?
Representative Larson.
Josh, if you could on that graph, so state investment grants and loans, $70 million. We get back locally and state revenue recapture around 44 million. Leaves, 30, 28, something I'll just say, use the word consumed. I don't know the right word for that in the process of developing that. Yep. Is that a fair percentage as you look at others, just trying to understand? And if so, where is that return on investment then recaptured?
Chairman Nicholas, Representative Larson, that's a really good question. And what I like about that is you take a look at the investment that we make into a community, and then you look at what comes back to the state. And you're right, there's a difference there. That difference is covered by us in what we call economic impact. So these are the hard dollar numbers that go out and come back. But within economic development, there is a component of economic impact. Those are the wages that are generated by those businesses. Those are the secondary effects of property taxes and sales taxes that go on. All of those things wrap up to be a much more compelling number. However, those aren't the hard dollars. So we're comparable in those, but what I don't want to talk a lot about compared to other states, because what I'll call the boundary conditions are different. So their economies are built much differently than ours. And so those conditions aren't the same. So it's difficult to talk about how the results are the same. Does that make sense, sir?
Yes, it does. And I appreciate that, because sometimes we just say that to give you, a broader region to look at, but I really do appreciate that. So then if we say that consumption then is reflected back in terms of, let's say, employment numbers, jobs, then return on investment to the state then would be property taxes, sales tax. What kind of time frame then is appropriate to get that return investment? So as we try to recapture that remaining $27 million, what type of time frame is an appropriate time frame to expect that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, we look at the reporting period for a 5-year period of time. We always look at a 5-year window. The other thing, and you mentioned this, and I think that this is really critical. Again, we're talking hard dollars here, but when you talk to a citizen of the community, what's important to them is, are there opportunities? Are there jobs in their communities? And that's really what that difference makes, is those jobs. And so that's the level of success that we're not showing necessarily on this graph, but it's represented in the communities and in the security for those families that are out there working.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, sir. We'll go ahead and continue on. I might jump to a slide here that demonstrates a little bit more about our approach. Excuse me. And in your book, that is number 3, I believe. So one of the things that's pretty interesting about our group is that, we're a team of somewhere between 30 and 40 people who are out there throughout the state working on helping our communities be stronger. And one of the things that we work on are you all are all familiar with things like recruiting. You're all familiar with the projects that we do, the economic development around the state. But one of the things that you might not really know about is the system in which we're trying to employ in each of our communities. And what I would say is that we're really working to develop a system that each of our communities can run on their own and run in a way that makes sense for them. And we call it the economic growth flywheel. And as I was mentioning to Representative Zwanitzer, we really start with what is the problem that is stopping growth in a community. And I think we can all understand that in most of the cases, no two communities are the same. They may have some similarities. They may be all part of this big box we call Wyoming, but ultimately each of them have different conditions on the ground that mean we need to look at things a little bit differently. So the idea of sharing best practices, while somewhat practical, is not always that effective. And so we start at that point. And each of the asks that you'll see in our exception requests really follow this strategy execution and this idea of an economic growth flywheel. We spend a lot of time determining what is the problem on the ground, because the more time we spend there, the more effective the resources we will use in further steps will be. If we don't spend much time there, we're sort of guessing, and we don't like to do that with state funds. And so that first step is really understanding what is the problem, and then it's coming up with a project that might address those particular problems. I think we've seen good examples of those throughout the state. As you looked at the projects that we've worked on, you can see that those are addressing a particular need and doing it in a way that is going to bring a positive ROI to the state. The next step in that is really also important, and that is, how do we bring the right resources to the table? So you'll notice again in that graph we talked about, how much follow-on money are we bringing? How much other funds are we bringing? Is the community able to bring money to the table and resources to the table that are going to make that project work? It's also about making the circle bigger in terms of the partners that you work with, because we do believe that economic development is not just a one agency game. It's not just a one person show. It is done by an entire community. And then that project is done. Now, I want to stop there for a moment, because we tend to think in terms of projects, and we tend to think in terms of the one project that's going to make all the difference. And that's just not reality. In reality, that project, step 4 on the flywheel, and that step is really just to make the next step possible, which is to generate that local capability or local capacity. That's in terms of know-how and in revenue. And if we don't execute this flywheel, then the money just stops at the project. And when money stops at a project, that's a bad investment for the state. And so we do all of our projects with the idea of, what will the next project be? What will the next problem we solve be? And frankly, how can the state play a little smaller role in each one of those? That's really the goal, is to create our communities with the ability to do economic development on their own with as little state help as possible. And so we, as you look through, for example, the exception requests that we have in our standard budget, this flywheel is how we approach every one of those elements. With that, I'm happy to walk through the exception requests if that's important, or we can walk through any other budget item that you'd like.
Any questions, Mr. Durrell, at this point before he goes through the exception requests? All right, seeing none, please proceed with the budget exception requests.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And at this time, we'll go ahead and start at the very top. Our first request is for
Representative Larson?
Thank you. So, Josh, if you could just, I'm assuming we're in your budget book. And so if you could just take us to the page number, and we'll, thank you.
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, thank you. You're correct. We are in the budget book. We're on page 14, the Section 6 Department Exception Request Priorities.
Go ahead.
So the first request you'll see is for an increase on our Business Ready Communities program. And this particular funding source is, as we mentioned, the way that we fund projects throughout the state. And again, it's not just about funding those projects, it's about creating a revenue stream for those communities to do economic development. We have a funnel that today has anywhere from anywhere around $160 million in projects that we're tracking at this particular point that we can see. And then there are always projects that come into communities from our recruiting efforts that we can't see immediately, but that can happen pretty fast. So a 2-year time frame for us is something that we've got to really kind of think about and make sure that we have the funds available for those opportunities.
Representative Larson?
Madam Chairman, could you, as we go through these on there, could you just refer us then to the page we'd find them in the budget book so that we can kind of peruse your justifications and stuff?
Representative Henderson? Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, a lot of good information here. I was wondering as you go through like the request, if you could kind of give an example so we can kind of connect it with stuff that you're actually working on. Try to pull it together, please. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Madam Chairman, Representative Henderson, if I can share my screen again, I can jump to a perfect example of how this works. And for you, that is slide number 6 or 7, I believe. So
For just a second. Is that background noise out in the hall? So shut them down. My hearing is the best and I'm the one who struggles the most. Please proceed.
Madam Chairman,
Senator Anderson?
I still don't see information for priority number 1 in the book.
we're on page 57. Oh, sorry, Madam Chairman, Senator Anderson, we're on page 57 of the budget book.
We are on page 57. Representative Henderson asked for a specific example of how these dollars are used. Director Durrell is sending us back to the PowerPoint presentation, page 5 or 6 of that PowerPoint presentation, which is part of your handout materials. This is where we are now. Mr. Durrell, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Henderson, the question is, how do these funds get utilized in a community? And how will this $38 million of BRC funds really help our state? And I think that this diagram does a pretty good job of demonstrating that. So if you start in the top left with the BRC grant, this is a particular example that came about last year for a business in Laramie that was looking to expand, considering other states, but ultimately settled to continue to join Wyoming in our community of Laramie. And this BRC grant was $20 million. Those funds are put into the community to build an asset. They were joined by $10 million of other funds from both the business and the community to build an asset that created 202 research and development jobs in plant sciences. And that asset then will pay the community back $5.9 million and the state back $3.9 million. So you can see that as we utilize those funds for businesses in our communities, we're creating not only jobs, but we are creating a fund for economic development in the community and coming back to the state that we can then use in BRC. So kind of following that model and that logic, you can see how that $38 million of funds for BRC can be utilized to, again, build stronger communities as well as keep the economic development flywheel moving in our communities and our state.
Madam Chairman?
Representative Stitt?
Director Durrell, thank you so much for this example. Could you explain the state revenue recapture, what that formula is? It says it's $3.9 million. Is that over the life of the project? Is that over the first 3 years? How does that money flow and why?
Madam Chairman and Representative Stitt, yes. So the revenue recapture component is an element that as the community generates lease revenue or revenue from the sale of the asset, 25% of that money comes back to the state. And so that's over the life of that project.
All right, go ahead. We're on page 57.
That's correct. 57 is the BRC ask. Any questions there?
Questions on the BRC ask? Mr. Richards?
I apologize for all of the jumping around, but now we're going to go to page 19.
We have a question from Mr.
Oh,
Richards.
sorry.
We
I'm
have
sorry.
also questions from other legislators, but we'll start with Mr. Richards first.
Madam Chairman, just to bring to your attention for markup, if you proceed to page 60, which is the unit table for this request, you will see that the recommendation includes $8 million appropriation from S4. That's the local government capital construction account housed in the Office of State Lands. That same dollar amount is also appropriated in the MRG program at OSLI. So at some point, you'll need to reconcile whether to spend those funds in OSLI for the MRG or within BRC.
Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And so we see, we see in the governor's recommendation that he recommends 30 of your $150 million and then denies 120, and then kind of a wonky thing where he's making a recommended appropriation out of the LSRA, which is really not, we're uncomfortable with because that's generally a legislative use. But is that, so is the intent there that it's 38 million?
Mr. Doral?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Larson, the intent is, our need was 150 million. But our intent is to ask for that 38 million that the governor recommended. That is the need that we have. From our perspective, we're not sure of all of the accounts and budgeting items to get to that, but that's what we need is that.
Okay, and so then, Kevin, you know,
Follow-up?
we have, thank you, Madam Chairman. We have this conversation on the governor's office making appropriations out of the LSRA, and we're familiar with the statutes that say that it's dependent upon legislative appropriation. Is your position then that ultimately the decision to appropriate it is ours, but the governor can recommend to do with it as he feels is appropriate?
Director Hibbert?
Mr. Chairman, the governor's rec is a rec. Your action is an appropriation. Your action is what we would work off of.
Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Director, what will 38 million get us?
Mr. Doral?
Madam Chairman and Representative Henderson, I think if we just sort of extrapolate the math from this particular plenty example, it could get us about 404 jobs. It could bring back about 7.8 million to the state. And I believe, if my math is correct, about 11.8 million into the local revenue. Now, what I will say is that on the next page of your the presentation, you'll see another example where actually more money comes back to the state and more money goes to the local community. It's sort of a, something that we work on every day is how do we make each deal better for the state and for those communities? And I think as you look at this, they're not always going to be better, but how do we continue to do so? And I think that you'll see that within the span of about a year, the deal got better. Same amount of money went out to a community to develop a lot of great jobs, but at the same time, more money is coming back into that community to use for economic development and to the state. And so it's I would say, you could start at that doubling the plenty deal, but I think that you could look that it could be even more.
All right, Mr. Doral, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the next priority is on page 19 of your budget book. While you're finding that, I'll give you a brief description of that. We're looking to add a regional director position to our team. Now, our team is spread out throughout the state, especially in our different regions. We have a person sort of on the ground in each of those regions that helps communities, again, find those binding constraints and really look for the resources that are going to help them do their projects. And one of the areas that we have is our southeast region of the state, which represents a really big portion of the population of our state and the business community in our state. That particular region is handled by someone who's also leading the role, leading that entire team. And so we have someone who's doing a dual or tri-duty really, because they've also been working on our comprehensive economic development strategy. And so we would like to have the resources on the ground in the southeast corner of the state to be there and to be that full time. So that is that particular position that we're looking for. The next priority we have is
Go ahead, Representative Sherwood. There's one, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, in the fact that you're not getting the $150 million or perceived that you're not going to, how important is this extra position? I totally understand it if you were to be funded the full amount that you're asking for, but if it comes out as at the governor's rec, is this position still a necessity? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Wanitzer, that's a really fair question, and it's actually still incredibly important because the work that those regional directors do is not necessarily tied to the funding that we receive. The work that they do is really to help those communities understand a binding constraint and develop projects. We happen to be a funding source for those projects in many cases, but that's not their sole focus. The next priority on the list is SBIR matching fund increase, and that is the Small Business Innovation Research is a program that has been started, I believe, since 2018, and that is a matching fund for a federal program that encourages small businesses to do innovation research for the federal government with the hopes of commercializing that research. That has been an incredibly important program for us. Oh, excuse me, page 33. Sorry about that. Thank you. And that's been a very important program for us because it generates great jobs and it generates the most. And so when you take a look at the jobs times wages return on investment to the state, that's one of our highest performing programs. It's also important to note that that is a way for us to continue to find ways for the University of Wyoming and the research that's going on there to commercialize businesses and provide jobs for students that are coming out of the University of Wyoming. That particular program is also being expanded at the federal level, and we want to be able to continue to match and continue to fund those businesses as they sort of get through what is known as the valley of death in business and approach either equity or venture capital. So any questions on that particular one? That one is one of our larger asks as well, and I'm happy to answer any questions there. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll go into the next few. Page 21 talks about our entrepreneurial development expertise. I think that this one is not only tied to that SBIR match funding increase, but it's also tied to what I would call and forgive the term, the ecosystem of entrepreneurship and high growth companies in Wyoming. That particular element is incredibly important to us. And, you know, a lot of times we talk about, well, we don't want to duplicate efforts and we want to make sure that everybody knows their role. We don't have a lot of overlaps right now in that. We have a lot of gaps. And without people who can understand that ecosystem and understand the pieces that are necessary for it to happen, that particular ecosystem is likely not going to be as effective. And so this role would shepherd that process, really not necessarily bring companies through it, but they would make sure that if there are gaps, we're figuring out how to fill those. And I think that that's an important component as we develop that out. There's been a lot of work in that in the last few years. I think we're making some changes that are going to be very effective, but we've really got to double down on that if we want to continue to have high growth businesses in our communities in Wyoming.
Please.
So as I read it, I make the assumption that it's one position, but I don't see that identified.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that is correct. It is one position.
Thank you.
Thanks for that clarifying question.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is this position going to be located in Cheyenne, or where will you do that?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Henderson, thanks for that question. Actually, it can be located anywhere in the state. One of the things that we found since our time in the last few years is that we have an abundance of talent throughout the state. And if we constrain it to one geography, we sort of cut out a large portion of the state. So we welcome folks from around the state. We have half of our workforce is actually remote throughout the state, and the other half is in Cheyenne.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So given that and the good possibilities with the SBIR, where would you suggest consider some location that's going to benefit more from this position?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Henderson, again, we do have right now one resource in that area. So entrepreneurship development is in Laramie, which is very helpful. And geography could be a factor in the hiring process, but we find the right person first. But yes, sir.
Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we continue down the list, if it's okay with you, I might just cover the positions first. That's all right. So we'll jump to page 22. So this request for personnel is for one person to help in our community leadership and engagement role. Community leadership is incredibly important to us. We find that many of the communities in Wyoming don't have dedicated economic development staff. They have people that are wearing a number of hats, and this position really helps with that role and helps facilitate the efforts of those particular communities. And we're finding some good success with that, and we want to continue to do so. There's a process that we undertake called assessment to action, which again really kind of helps those communities understand the flywheel and then begin to take small steps to make a difference.
Thank you, Director Durrell. I thought that was included in the responsibilities of your various regional folks.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, that is correct. That is part of that. However, what we're finding is that to be able to cover the specific needs, especially of the smaller communities, additional resources are needed there. That is in some cases handled by that person, but as you can imagine, the regional team is currently 6 with their leader, and so they have a lot of ground to cover. And so that gives us the ability to cover just a little bit more. Thank you for that question.
Okay, next position.
So that concludes the positions that we're requesting today. Hopefully that helps a little bit. The next few elements are what I would consider partners and programs that really kind of help that flywheel. And so we could dive into any of these in detail if you'd like, but I'm going to kind of group them together. So you'll see priority number 5, which is on page 35. We can jump to that one, the Economic Development Laboratory. The next priority is the Wyoming Academy. So you'll see 35, 36, 37, 38, 41, 43, 44, and 46 are all what I would call programs and partners that help us. Those first 2 are things that we do internally. And then the next group of things, the Center for Business and Economic Analysis, the Wyoming Women's Business Center, Manufacturing Works, Small Business Development Center, or what you might know as SBDC in your communities, Wind River Development, and then Asia Pacific Trade Office. Those are all partners that we utilize to execute our strategy.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to have a discussion on priority 14. It's on page 46, which is the Asia Pacific Trade Office. I know Idaho, Montana are actually, I think, in the same building that we are. Virginia just signed 2 months ago to have a trade office there. New Jersey is putting one there in 2024. Can you talk to me a little bit about the trade office and the denial by the governors on the 25,000? And also, what has been the success of the trade office over the last couple of years?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Salazar, thanks for that question. This is an area that, you know, we continually look at the funding that we put into this and the effort that we put into this. A number of businesses from Wyoming, as well as representatives from the Business Council, went to Taiwan this past summer to work with that group and to continue to build those relationships. And members of that particular group came to Wyoming a couple years ago. And so we look at this as an investment that's probably going to take a lot of time. But what I will tell you is that each biennium that goes by, we're a little bit more critical each time, because at some point you have to see some successes. The successes that we've seen from that particular office to date are quite small. And I don't know if it's a lack of effort from our team, from their team, or from our communities necessarily. It's just, it's a long road to hoe. I think it's one of those things where we're going to have to see what happens. And we're looking a lot into the energy sphere. So as new energy sources that come from Wyoming, things like ammonia or hydrogen, those markets open up, there may be a really good reason to be there. And so we kind of have to hedge against that. So we're looking at that as an investment into the future. But again, I think we have to be more and more critical each year. It begins to indicate what we're seeing also in other recruitment as well, that there are elements of our basic framework for economic development that are they're not as far along as other places. And that's what's slowing us down. So even in recruiting, we've taken a much more, product development focus, if you will, on our state. And how do we make sure that it is primed and ready to go, so that when we go out and do the sales effort of recruiting, that they come back to a product that they all want. And so it's sort of indicating the lack of success there, to me, indicates that there's a product development challenge. And again, we're addressing that in our recruiting efforts.
Mr. Chairman, so 2 questions then. Are we making money on our investment now? And number 2, will we still have the office open in 24, 25?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Salazar, we are not making money on our investment to date. Without this investment in our budget, we will not have that office open in 24, 25, or in 25, 26 biennium, excuse me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, there is one element that I want to take a little bit of a deep dive on, and that is priority number 9. That's on page 37, the Wyoming Women's Business Center. Yeah, page 37 again. This particular program has been incredibly successful at starting entrepreneurial businesses for women throughout the state, and their programming has continued to expand. Also, their ability to get federal monies has expanded. And as such, they came to us nearly a year ago and began to talk about the new programming that they're doing, as well as an expanded effort to generate, these women-owned businesses. And the numbers that they're sharing with us are really, really good. I think it's a great sign. It's a very well-run organization. And the reason I bring it to your attention is that I made a nice little mistake on the budget book with this particular item. And so when we looked at their proposal for additional services, which we agreed would be very helpful for the business community in Wyoming, we got a proposal for them for $300,000 per year to do their efforts. I read that as $300,000 for the biennium. So I increased their normal spend to that $300,000 mark. What we learned after the budget books were published and as we were going through this again, is that, again, I made a mistake and it should actually be $600,000 for the biennium for their particular services. We support that ask wholeheartedly. We think it is absolutely a great program for them. And so I wanted to at least bring that to your attention. We have discussed this with a number of folks, including the governor's office and Representative Sherwood, who is carrying our budget for a deeper understanding. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
So thank you, Director Durrell. I'm not tracking with you. That was priority 9.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, correct. That is priority number 9, which you can find on page 37.
37, and you're talking about a $600,000 request.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, let me walk through it with you because it becomes a little bit goofy with our normal budget. Our standard budget has them listed for $245,000, which is what we have typically invested in them each biennium. Their expanded request is $600,000. But again, I read it as $300,000 for the biennium rather than the year. And what that meant was I put in an exception request for $55,000, which takes their normal request up to that $300,000 mark.
So
What they're asking for now is the exception request would need to be $355,000 to make them whole at $600,000.
But I see a request for $55,000.
That's correct, sir. That's excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson. That's correct. The $55,000 would take their standard budget request of $245,000 up to that $300,000 mark.
Well, can you take me to the page that shows me their standard budget?
Hold on a moment while I look for that. Chairman, Representative Larson. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe that is page 27.
27.
I'll just apologize in advance for any paper cuts all of you get from all this flipping through the pages.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that line by line item is included in the 900 series on that table.
Again, please. Couldn't hear you.
Yes, that's included in the 900 series on that table.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Just trying to
Don, go
track
ahead.
it, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe the 900 series standard budget for this item is on page 51, 51.
Mr. Chairman, is that in 903 or 901? Is it in the 900 series, Don?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it is in 0901. Unfortunately, it is commingled with other.
Sure. Okay, that makes more sense.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, follow, Mr. Chairman. So as I read this, Director Durrell, it talks about clients enrolled, clients are participating. What does it mean to be enrolled?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, one of the programs that the Wyoming Women's Business Center puts together is they do it almost like a class. So you enroll in a course that helps you build a business plan and take those actions in order to start and run your business. So they see it as a sort of an educational component.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarification, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might address numbers 16 and 17, just for a matter of housekeeping. Those are two budget items intended to rid us of the B11 process for those particular things. Those are pages 49 and 50.
Chairman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to clarify the difference of what's different between priority 14 and the priority 17. If they both deal with kind of the same area. One for 300 and the other's 429.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, can you say that again? I didn't catch it. I'm sorry.
Priority 14 on page 46. If you look at the next page, page 47, the number there is 429. Or do you know the Asia Pacific trade? Yeah, sorry. Sorry. Page 46, page 47 is priority 14. It's 429, which is related to Asia Pacific trade. And if I understand priority 17 correctly, that's also for foreign trade. I'm just trying to clarify the difference and if it, hopefully the synergy between the two.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman and Representative Henderson, yeah, thank you for that. So the Asia Pacific Trade Office is more of a, we're focusing on a particular area, and we're kind of focusing more on looking at bringing in foreign direct investment as well as opening up Asia Pacific for trade operations, but we have people on the ground there. With the STEP program, that is about helping our manufacturers and our businesses that are in Wyoming export to other markets. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 50, in the table there, it shows $100,000 in property rental. That's a third of the request. That seems awfully high, or are we using this entity to cover property rentals for other parts of the agency?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, that's a good question. I had the exact same question because I was thinking to myself, why are we renting real property here? But it's actually for trade show booth rental and trade show display rental and things like that. So it is not real property in the same way that I thought of it either. So thanks for bringing that out and making that clarified.
Mr. Chairman, then back on priority 16, page 49. My understanding is this is being funded through the ARPA dollars. And those, if I remember correctly, expire at the end of 2026. So then you anticipate this position will go away at the end of 2026, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, the SSBCI program actually runs for 9 years after. So that is part of a different, it may be part of those funds, but it actually extends 9 years. So that's where that money is utilized. That is our venture capital funds, the State Small Business Credit Initiative. And again, it just removes that B11 process.
Mr. Chairman, those are ARPA formula monies, not to be confused with any ARPA direct or SLRFA. Formula funding.
Kevin, can you remind us what those monies can be used for?
I'm sorry, I could not hear your question.
Could you remind us what those dollars can be used for? Okay, I mean, it talks about 58 million. And, you know, they're funding a position that is going to get paid $150,000 a year for 9 years. But I'm wondering what else could those dollars be used for?
Mr. Chairman, in that case, that is the State Small Business Credit Initiative. We utilize that $58 million for venture capital funds. We're able to take equity in high growth businesses in Wyoming with those funds. Those are federal funds, so we're able to do that. And the money that is utilized as an administration fund does fund the position, but the bulk of that, the great majority of that money is utilized for investing in Wyoming businesses.
So Director Durrell, could you share with us any venture capital investments we've made to date and how those are going?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, I could provide the person who could give you the exact details if you would like. Some of those are public, some of those are not. One of the things I will say is that we let them publish publicize that before we do. So I might call Mr. Bert Adam, who's our investments director, to the table to answer that specific question.
Mr. Chairman, Bert Adam, Investments Director for the Wyoming Business Council. Representative Larson, so we've made 6 equity investments to date. 2 of those are public. And so the first one was in a company from Cheyenne called Language.io. Language.io, they do translation, so machine learning, artificial intelligence-based translation. The second investment we made was in a Jackson company called Frontline Wildfire Defense. And they do both hardware and software installations for building protection, hardening for wildfires.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Adams, could you describe the scope of those two? In other words, how much money?
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, most of the time we're letting the businesses determine what they want to share as far as what money we've invested. However, with those two, it's pretty public. So Language.io raised $8 million in venture, and we participated for $3 million. And then Frontline Wildfire Defense, to date, including all of their prior rounds of funding that then converted at this first preferred stock round, was $12 million total, and we participated for up to $2 million. They're still trying to close the final price.
Chairman? And so, Mr. Adams, so I take it if the businesses succeed, at some point, the state gets paid back. Is that how it works?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, yes, that's how that works. Like Mr. Durrell stated, it's a 9-year program. The money stays federal for those 9 years. After the program is over, then any proceeds that we make would change colors to state money.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this one, 200,000 contract services, what kind of services would you expect to be utilized in this expenditure? Contract services.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters, can you say that again?
Page 49 in the table, you show 200,000 in contract services. What kind of services would you expect those to be?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I'm going to have to get back to you on the specifics of that. So that could either be contractors that are helping us with the particular deals and understanding them and developing the legal components of that. It can also relate to the services that we pay an employee to do that, depending on exactly how those federal funds are managed. So we're probably going to have to get back to you on the exact details of that.
So how much of that 19 million in your first round of tranche funding have you committed or encumbered?
I'll call Mr. Adam up here again. He'll have the exact details. Bert, you might want to stay.
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat that?
Yeah, your first round of funding. Your first round of funding, you had 19 million. How much of that have you committed or encumbered? How much is remaining?
Mr. Chairman, so right now we've invested approximately 8 million. Again, some of those are commitments that we're still trying to decide if they're going to come through, like Frontline Wildfire Defense. In that one, of the 2 million, we've invested 1.875 million, and until they close the rest of that, we're only going to play a percentage of that.
Okay, further questions?
Chairman, when will the next 2 tranches arrive?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, they're 3-year tranches. So as far as federal treasury is concerned, we have 3 years to invest up to 80% of that first tranche of the 19 million. If we get to that, we can call it down anytime sooner for the second and or third tranches. So we have a maximum of 9 years that are federal funds, but we only have 3-year windows for each tranche, or otherwise it's beyond.
Okay. Josh, go ahead. One more question.
Are there any conditions or requirements in the event that the investment goes south back to the federal government on those obligated funds?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, there's no clawbacks in these. They are pretty standard venture investments in that.
So Josh, we've been bouncing around. Tell us where you want to go next.
Well, in my mind, I'd like to just stand for questions and say that, you know, one of the things that's important to us in this entire exception request table is kind of the idea that, you know, in years past, I've always thought of it as, well, you know, unlike other agencies, maybe we don't have the urgency that they do, and the programs that they provide maybe are a little bit more urgent. And I think over the last couple of years, I've really decided that that's not the case, that there's a lot of urgency in our communities to build an economic development system that works. And so while, you know, I always think of it as whatever we're able to get, we'll deploy with a lot of discipline, even more discipline each time, and we'll deploy for the most good of the state as possible. And I thought, you know, even if we got $1, we could do a lot with it. But, you know, I really think that there's a lot more urgency now than I've thought of in the past. And I think that our communities, which is who we really serve, our communities are out there trying to figure out what's next. And this is a way for us to generate revenue for them to do economic development. And I really believe strongly in the flywheel. I believe strongly in what we're doing. And I think that there's a lot more urgency to this than maybe is even appreciated by me. And so when you look at this budget, as well as the other ones that you see, just realize that our communities have an urgent need, and there's a lot of opportunity out there. But to be able to take advantage of it, we're going to need some funds to help them with. Whether that be the big energy projects that are happening and things with the energy matching funds, we're there to help the community out. In a lot of those cases, those are the businesses that are being helped by those funds, but we're there to help the community develop the things like the infrastructure that are needed to grow, the really exciting and sexy stuff like water and sewer. We get to play in that realm, but it's really important. And so when a community has a growth problem, we want to be there for them. And so I think there's more urgency than we usually appreciate for this. And I would just ask for you to look at that and think about the communities around the state and how they can utilize these funds to continue to grow. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Director Durrell, if we could go back to page 38 on your manufacturing works, which as we've listened to the manufacturing works, there's a real interest in trying to collaborate and do that. But of this exception of 400,000, almost 500,000, a quarter of that, or 107, then goes to support a regional director. Is that regional director in place, or and how are we, if so, how is that being funded now? Is that come out of the 981 or the 982 that you have in your standard budget?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, what I can tell you is that the manufacturing works team has kind of gone from worst to first in the last 4 years. And by doing so, they've kind of uncovered that there's a lot more need out there. That particular regional director position, I don't believe that it's filled yet. And I also know that a lot of these funds are to match an expanded federal grant funding. And if you'd like, I can get more detail on that from the folks at Manufacturing Works as far as that particular regional director position.
So as I read it, Mr. Chairman, it would suggest that that 107 for a regional director, and I'm still not sure if that's in place or if that's something you're creating. But then that goes to one-to-one match, so it goes 214 for regional. So is that position in place now, or are we creating it?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, that position is not in place currently.
So So in these others, you make a request for a new position, but you don't hear.
Yeah,
Walk me through that.
yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson. So Manufacturing Works is a partner through the Business Resource Network. So this is part of that 900 series that we were just talking about with the Wyoming Women's Business Center. These are not employees of the Wyoming Business Council. They are partners of ours, and that's a separate organization that is federally funded and matched by us to do essentially manufacturing consulting around the state.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Mr. Chairman, could we look at number 8, that $1 million that's going to the University of Wyoming? Could you tell us about that one?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, so yeah, we're on page 23. Senator Anderson, that's a group in the economics department at the University of Wyoming that really kind of is helping us look at the correct data and understand the economic forces that are happening within our state and outside of that. We have been working with the Growth Lab at Harvard for a number of years now. It's been a program that we've been working with. And one of the things that we want to do is, as that particular relationship winds down in 2025, we want to develop the capabilities at the University of Wyoming to continue that support, because we know that the kind of that hardcore economics analysis is something that we're going to need moving forward, and we want to develop those tools in state.
One last question, again, on the trade office, because it looks like we're going to close it down when other states are going into Asia. And I am concerned that those international markets are not going to be tapped by our business community. And with this office shutting down, the experiment will be dubbed a failure. And I'm afraid that is going to have an impact on when we would ever open an international trade office, whether it's in South America or Europe or Asia. And what are your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Salazar, I think you're asking the right question. I think that's the question that we ask with it. As you can see, we recommended to continue it. And as you can see, we don't feel like we have the full set of data to deem this experiment a success or a failure. I think that we're continuing to work toward that. As far as looking into the future, let's say it stops today. You know, what I would say is that we do a lot of rigor up front to decide where we're going to go. Now, this particular Asia Pacific Trade Office, it was here before I was, so I can't speak to the analysis that was done to decide that. But what I can tell you is that I think you always have to look at the conditions on the ground and in the moment to make decisions for the future, rather than sort of looking in the rear view and saying, well, we tried that once and it didn't work, because again, the boundary conditions are different. And I think that sort of scientific method toward problem solving is one that we're going to continue to take. So I hope it doesn't cloud it. I hope we can learn some lessons from it, but I hope that it doesn't necessarily completely cloud it. And, you know, depending on what happens, we'll sort of cross that bridge when we get there.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions. Knowing you have some field offices, but what is primarily the remote work, telework policy that you offer?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, as I alluded to before, we actually take a pretty, one of the things that we're able to do is take a pretty liberal look at the remote work policy. And again, in 2020, when we were all working remotely, what we found is that we were pretty darn effective, and that we were able to utilize talents from all over the state. And so we look at it, we look at geography probably a little less critically than others, because we look at the person and the talent that they bring first. Opening it up to the state of the entire state of Wyoming as a employment grounds has been really useful for us. I think when I came aboard, we probably had 75% of our team was in maybe more, 80% of our team was in Cheyenne. And since that time, we're now half and half. Half of our team is here in Cheyenne, half of our team is spread throughout the state in really every corner. And what we're finding is that that we're able to do our jobs remotely. The type of work we do can be done remotely. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a joke, when we all came back to the office and we all stayed on Zoom, even though we were all in the office for our meetings, it kind of told us that we could do this. And so we have taken a much more open approach to that. And we do have, as I mentioned, half and half now. It's been very effective. We just hired a project manager in the Natrona County area, and it was a statewide search.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, one other question?
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're switching subjects. Knowing most of your agency is really a 900 agency. Technology replacement, computers, things like that don't show up in your budget as much. Could you let us in a little insight on your replacement cycle? And then also, and with that, how much do you interact with ETS in providing those services?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters, that's a good question. We're actually engaged with ETS as much as we can. We want to utilize those services. It doesn't show up in our budget this time because we had already budgeted for it. We are a little bit of an oddball agency in some ways, but we have worked with ETS to come up with that plan, and we plan to replace 10 computers per year, which when you have a team of about 40, that's about one fourth every year, and I think that's pretty reasonable. And we already had money in our budget for that, so that's why you don't see it in the new ask, is because we had already had money for that. So you don't see it in our ask, you might see it in the ETS budget, but we work closely with them on that.
Follow. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I think this might be a useful opportunity to provide an example that we've identified in the Chapter 17 report. If you could turn to page 24, I think it will shed some light on how this is being budgeted.
Mr. Chairman, on page 24 in object code 242, you'll notice there's $23,140 in the standard budget. All of the 240 series are, as we've discussed over the past few days, one time. And each time agencies would like to include those in their budget for a biennium, they bring those to your attention through exception requests. This is an instance where they use the Chapter 17 process instead to include it into their exception request. This is one of two examples where they didn't bring those to you as for discussion. Instead, they just built it into their standard. If this is left in here in the 27-28 biennium, we will pull it out because it is part of those items that just automatically get readjusted each time. And this is just one example of how that has been built into the budget and probably shouldn't have been.
Okay, further questions for Don? Okay, further questions for Josh? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Josh and the members of the Business Council for the exciting work that you're doing. And as we have conversations about resources and building local capacity, I personally understand the need for another regional, just because I live in the area that you're discussing. But I want to make sure we're understanding the difference between the request for a regional person for the Business Council and make sure we're clear on how that position would differ from the regionals in our external partners, because I think we're getting a little bit of semantics here. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Sherwood, thanks for that. I'll do my best to clarify. It can be a little bit interesting. Turns out the words economics and business tend to get thrown around together and they don't always match. So when we talk about Wyoming Business Council personnel who are regional directors in their region, we are talking about the folks that, one, are employed by us, part of our 100 series, and those are individuals who are really looking at the economic challenges that a community faces. Again, things like those big infrastructure projects, particular housing issues, particular business issues, those kinds of things. When we talk about the Small Business Development Center or Manufacturing Works or Wyoming Women's Business Center, they may have regional representatives in the state as well. That comes out of our 900 series. And it also, they tend to address a different area of the market than we do. So for example, the Small Business Development Center has a number of regionals around the state. I think you could see in their expanded ask, they're wanting to continue to have one in the Fremont and Teton County areas. And those are individual business counselors. So they're helping a business with things like marketing plans or QuickBooks or, you know, other accounting issues. They're really looking more at the very detailed elements of an individual business and counseling there. We're looking at more at the economic factors that impact community. Hopefully that helps.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman, final question. Director Durrell, if you mentioned the Harvard Growth Study, is there a place on your website or someplace where a person can go and just see all of the reports they've issued?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Stiff, there is an area of our website that those are available. And we'll continue to put those out. It isn't the one study that happens. It's a number of studies that are developed, and it's more of an action plan. I don't have the web address off the top of my head, but I bet I could get it pretty quickly. It looks like Ms. Fitzgerald has it on the top of her head, so she'll share it.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Stith, that's on the approach page on our website. So you click on About and Approach when you go to wyomingbusiness.org. Yep. And then there are several reports on that page, along with a lot of information about the approach.
Okay, further questions? Anything else, Josh?
Mr. Chairman, nothing else. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay. Appreciate it very much. Thanks everybody for being here. Don, so we're finishing about 15 minutes early. If lunch is here, we could come back up here and tell us what.
Yes, the Department of Corrections had been on hold, but as we approached 11:30, they stayed at their location. So they'll be here available anytime you reconvene after lunch.
Okay, so committee, you want to come back at 12:45 or 12:30? 12:45, all right. We'll stand in recess till 12:45.